Good morning, 8th grade. It is chapter 3, section 2. Real quick, make sure you are completing your questions using complete sentences. 3 sentences on the essay. Number, whatever the last one was the essay. I'm not sure. I can't remember if it was yours. I didn't label, or the 7th grade. But I'm pretty sure it was yours from yesterday. About Johnson's impeachment. So make sure that number 6 is the essay, is the one that was pretty similar to the one before, or whatever the last one is. You'll see it. Make sure that's 3 sentences. The short answers are 1 sentence, and the vocab come from the back of the book, right? The full definition. Okay. I told you last time, and I put it in your classwork, we're going to be collecting notebooks sometime during that first week of October before fall break. So you've got this section of notes and 2 more. And then after that, I'm going to want your notebooks to come in. Posters. Well, that was our question last time. I don't know. I mean, I'll try to show you here, but there are some in the back corner there that, they're all like the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I didn't know if whether to count that as 1 or count it as 3 or count, they're all different ones. So I counted legislative, executive, and judicial, and all the ones under it as 1 each. After that, I counted 32 total. So minimum of 32. I had a couple guesses of 35 and 36. So those were the winners. 35, I guess, technically was the winners. The winner. If I can't remember who put that. If you're interested in counting posters. Don't forget to fill out today's form to answer the attendance question, which will come in later. When we left off, the radical Republicans and Lincoln, who was a Republican, were having a little tug of war over how harsh we were going to treat the southern states in order to make them grovel and beg to get back into the Union. And Lincoln's strategy, and again, I said I admire it, and I do, is to let's leave the past in the past, and let's move on with our lives, and let's focus on working towards the future instead of relitigating and rehashing things that have happened in the past. The radical Republicans, on the other hand, are angry. And like I said, also, anger is not necessarily something to be admired, but it's a valid feeling at some point in time in your life. Now, you guys are in junior high. Most of you get angry, and you probably overreact, and it's not your fault. It's hormones. I did too when I was in junior high, but you'll grow out of that. But I'm saying at some point in time, your anger is fine. If I was to punch someone in the face and then be like, hey, let's not live in the past. Let's not talk about that face punching. That's not going to help our relationship. That's not really, and them being angry at me is pretty valid. And so, the radical Republicans had very good reasons. 600,000 people dead, billions of dollars of damage in the South, millions of dollars of damage in the North. Now the president's been killed. And so they've got, they've got really good reasons to be angry. And so now the tug of war is pretty over. It's one-sided because Lincoln, of course, gets assassinated in April of 1865. And so Southern states start to reform their governments. A lot of radical Republicans still think that Johnson's plan is even too easy. And again, as we talked about very briefly last time, Johnson's plan wasn't based around the idea that, hey, we're going to help these freedmen. It was based around the idea that I'm the president now and I'm powerful and you need to beg to me. Johnson was still incredibly, even by the standards of 1860s, pretty racist. When you consider he was part of Lincoln's party. And so there are a lot of what they called radical Republicans. And like I said in class 2 days ago, and I don't remember if I said it in the video, but if you look at their plan and look at their opinions, they're not really that radical. Their plans were like, hey, if you fought a war against the United States, you shouldn't be allowed to be a United States senator. And is that radical? I'm not sure I feel that way. So they're like, hey, their radical plan is like, hey, let's help freed slaves gain literacy and skills and money to help succeed in life. And that's not that radical, when you consider these people that were, in chains in slavery. We're not allowed to become literate. We're not allowed to gather in groups. We're not making any money. And so they went to some real, lunchroom, junior high level petty stuff where they would show up to work and they'd be like, you're not going to be allowed to sit down. And so we had a big fight in Congress. And again, I say this all the time. Those of you that were with me last year heard me say this in class a lot. We have this idea in America, old people like me especially, say all the time, like, well, politicians, they argue all the time. And back in my day, they were, at least people were civil and they got along and they didn't always agree on everything. Yeah, history doesn't really bear that out when we talk about these people, like you literally can't sit down. Or we talked about last year, chapter 1 this year, about the guy just wailing on the other dude with a cane on the actual floor of the Senate. Or last year, even when we talked about Aaron Burr, who was the vice president of the United States, shooting and killing Alexander Hamilton. So the idea that people used to at least be able to get along. No, they just had different cuss words that aren't cuss words anymore. And so people, now if you say somebody's a scoundrel, you're like, oh, that's not that bad. But back then it was like, ooh, people were still as uncivil. So by 1866, many southern states were trying to pass laws that still restrict African Americans from a normal life. They're called black codes. And they still, if you're black, you can't gather in a group of more than 3. Still that same kind of stuff. That's not cool. That's very unconstitutional. The reason it's unconstitutional is because of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment says that all citizens have equal rights. The problem is, though, we've only had 13 amendments this time. So the 14th Amendment hasn't come in. And so in order to prevent the southern states, the radical Republicans, at first passed the Civil Rights Act. They set up courts to actually fight for African American rights to be able to, exercise their newfound freedom. The idea that you're free, but we're going to pass a bunch of these laws that only apply very narrowly and very specifically to you is very un-American. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1866 sets up a system to try to prevent this from happening. It gave the federal government the power to interrupt state affairs to protect African American rights. Basically, the Constitution we talked about last year, we took our Constitution test, said basically that states are underneath the federal government, but only in specific instances that are mentioned in the Constitution. And if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, then the states can make up their own mind. The example I always give is speed limits. There's no national speed limit. And so that's state to state. And so basically what this act did is came in and said, no, we are the boss here. We're not going to let you make all these, quote unquote, black codes, laws that only apply to a certain part of the population. So it also reversed the Dred Scott decision. We talked about that in chapter 1, which is probably the most, I don't want to say the most, one of the most embarrassing Supreme Court decisions in American history. Again, I'm not really into ranking what's definitely number 1, but it's definitely up there. The fact that it said that if you're black, you don't count as a citizen, you don't have any rights, you're literally a piece of property, and we have no right to end slavery anywhere. That's a pretty big black eye on our Supreme Court history. And again, I say this over and over: the idea that we've made mistakes. And me saying hey, this is embarrassing, this is wrong, this is a bad judgment. That's part of it. The idea that we are going to hey, let's not talk about things that happened that were negative in the past does not help anything. It doesn't, if I'm driving a truck down the road and a kid runs out in front of me on a bike and I hit him, I can't be like, well, that mistake was in the past. No, you got to get out and you got to help the person. And so that's, a big argument that's going on now today. People are like, well, slavery, it was bad, but let's not talk about it. Or the Dred Scott decision was bad, but let's not talk about it. Let's focus on the good things America's done. And that's fine. We can talk about good things that America's done, and we will. But in order to learn from your mistakes in the past, you have to recognize and talk about your mistakes in the past. So President Johnson vetoed both bills basically because he said, well, the southern states aren't voting on them, and which is another, kind of, one of those riddles like, well, they're not actually states right now. They left. So they don't get to vote. And he's like, well, the war's over. We need to let them vote. But the real reason is because he didn't want to give African American equal rights. And so the radical Republicans are so radical. Again, I don't really agree with that. I mean, history's written the label, and I can't change it. But I don't really agree that it's fair. I don't think their plans were that radical. Like, hey, everybody should be treated equally. Like, that's not a very radical plan. But anyway, they had enough of these Republicans in the Senate and the House of Representatives that they could override Johnson's vetoes, which, again, as you maybe remember from last year in the Constitution test, is a 2/3 vote instead of just a majority. And so the 14th Amendment, again, is considered by many, including me, to be our most important amendment and part of our Constitution, because it guarantees that if you're born in the United States and you're a citizen, you are supposed to be treated with equal respect under the law. But it also is still a little bit of that kind of old stuff where we're like, Native Americans don't count, which, again, if anybody should count, it should be them. They were here before anybody. But we've since ratified and fixed that. Also, women, you, if you're listening and you're a woman, you don't have rights at this time as an equal citizen. The women's suffrage amendment was 19, and this is 1866 to 1868. It basically took them part of 3 years to get this passed. The 19th Amendment, which guaranteed women equal citizenship and the right to vote, was not passed until 1919. Women couldn't vote in America until 1920. And so this is a huge, very powerful amendment that did a lot of good, but it also fell a little bit short of like, hey, we're all on the same footing here. So in 1867, the first Reconstruction Act was passed. And basically, they divided the South that had not ratified their new plans yet into 5 military districts. The implication is when implication means when you say something without saying it. Like if you were doing a test in my class and I was like, hey guys, I'm going to, walk out of the room and cover my eyes and ears for 5 minutes. Don't cheat on your test. What I'm really implying is like, hey, go ahead and cheat on your test. And so the implication that they're giving to the South here is like, hey, remember that Sherman fellow that burned down pretty much all of your entire little country? That's not really a country, it's part of our country. Well, we're putting the military back in there in these 5 different districts, and we'll do it again. So get your crap in order, or else little shooty, stabby, Bernie is going to come back. So the second Reconstruction Act was like, hey, gather voters and let's have a constitutional convention, because I have a feeling, based on what I just said on the last slide, the whole Army thing, that they're going to be ready to play by the rules now. And so, of course, that's what happened. By 1870, all 10 southern states that hadn't already joined, I think Tennessee was already off the apple cart before this, they got their act together and they rejoined the Union. Impeachment! I don't know why I put an exclamation point there, but who knows? I guess I was excited that day. So basically what happened was the Senate was mad at Johnson. Johnson hated the Senate and the House of Representatives. And basically they were having a real petty, the Senate was passing laws like the one you see here, the Tenure of Office Act. Basically like, we're the boss. We can tell you what to do. And then Johnson would go ahead and break that law on purpose. You're like, what are you going to do about it? Then they impeached him. Now, to be impeached, as hopefully you've learned, does not mean you've been convicted. That just means you're going to trial to find out if you've done something wrong. Okay? There have now been 4 presidents that have been impeached. Okay? Johnson, of course, is your first here. Then you had Richard Nixon, who quit. He never went to trial. He was like, okay, they're going to find me guilty, so I'm quitting first. Bill Clinton in the early 90s, and of course Donald Trump this past year. None of them have ever actually been convicted and kicked out of office. We feel like Nixon probably would have been, but like I said, he, said, I'm not a crook, cried a little bit, got on a helicopter, flew off into the sky. So anyway, like I said, to impeach someone is to formally charge the president or another officer, another executive elected official of wrongdoing. And that, again, that being impeached is like being arrested. and taken to trial. It does not mean you're guilty. It means you're being accused of doing something. Okay, you still have to have the trial. Okay, and so they didn't have enough votes to actually kick him out of being president, so he got to keep on keeping on. So Ulysses S. Grant, who we remember from Chapter 2, becomes president. He was more in line with radicals. He was more in line with trying to preserve and obtain equal rights for everybody. And 13, 14, and 15th Amendment, the first two had already been passed. Grant saw through the 15th Amendment getting passed, which, as again, if you were in 7th grade with me last year, you should know is voting rights for freed slaves. So, attendance question. What's your favorite? What do you do in your free time? What's your favorite hobby? Again, you don't have to give me any more detail than you want. I like to read. I like to play video games. I like to stare at a spot on the ceiling and spin around until I'm dizzy. Whatever. Doesn't have to be right. I just need to know that you're watching these videos and you are paying attention and you understand the question. This is the end of the slideshow for today. My little thing in the corner here disappeared, so I don't know how much time we've been going, but it doesn't seem like it's been too long. So keep wearing your masks, keep washing your hands, make sure you're getting your notebook caught up if you're behind, keep answering your questions with complete sentences. And if you haven't been doing any of these things, A, you're probably not watching the video to begin with, but B, you need to catch up. I still have several zeros from Chapter 2 test. People that, and this was 1 week ago now, people that haven't taken the test. And so if your social studies grade's like 30% or 20% or 10% right now and you don't know why, you haven't taken the test. So you need to make sure you get caught up. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.